This video contains politics, implied nudity, and the mispronunciation of names. Viewer discretion is advised.
何ですかその格好。いつも言われるから露出度を抑えたんだ。
What are you wearing that for?
Oh, those pesky patriarchal societal demands were getting on my nerves. So I changed clothes. Patriarchal.
This is why anime should have never become mainstream. The West is slowly becoming a liberal feminist war zone. It was only a matter of time before SJWs infiltrated anime.
Keep politics out of anime.
Hope the Japanese can fight this infection of SJW once it gets to their land.
This is why we don't trust the US of A with our anime. Japan doesn't take politics into their shows, but the US needs to sell to the feminists.
Who wakes up in the morning and thinks, I'll just put my own political views in this anime where it doesn't belong at all?
This is exactly why I went full sub and never looked back. Dub is being infiltrated by these lefty commies with their propaganda mob justice mentality.
Hi, lovelies! I translate anime and games for a living, and I'm a feminist. I just love injecting my feminist agenda into my translations, killing the patriarchy one anime at a time. Now, in my years of promoting heavily localized translations on this channel, someone in the comments section will inevitably bring up the controversial dub of Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid. And with the season 2 just around the corner, I had to check it out to see what the outrage was all about. After reading through a few angry threads here and there on Reddit, I finally arrived at Ethnic Weeb's video, which concisely lays out 3 examples of where the dub allegedly inserted SJW feminist buzzwords where they were not in the original Japanese, the most infamous, of course, being...
Oh, those pesky patriarchal...
Now, as a bona fide social justice warrior, I see no problem adding feminist buzzwords to spice up a translation a little bit, and I feel quite triggered seeing all the hate directed at the Dragon Maid English dub. I could lash out, accuse the dissenters of sexism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, cancel them, and move on with my life. Or I could listen to the other side in good faith and maybe even learn something. So, I am going to examine the complaints brought up by the angry anime fans and see if they hold up under good faith scrutiny. Now, a part of me hesitated to do this analysis. The backlash was 2 years ago after all, and many people smarter than me already contributed quite a bit to the discourse on Reddit and various other forums. And why re-traumatize everyone when I could just make JoJo reviews in my swimsuit for clicks instead? But this sort of backlash is still ongoing, even today. Between the Fata Morgana Tsundere controversy, the Eva translations, a colleague of mine recently being ripped apart for translating Nini as Lil Brudder, this isn't going away on its own. The otaku community must address this issue before the cases pile up higher and higher and the rift between fans and translators grows wider and wider. So pull up a chair, get yourself a nice hot beverage and a plate. It's tea time. Now, to understand whether or not these dub translations were indeed faithful or unfaithful to the original Japanese, you would first have to understand Japanese. Check. And you'd have to watch the entire series through in both the original Japanese and the English dubs, which I did. The first time I watched Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid all the way through start to finish was in the original Japanese language with the subtitles. I generally found the subs to be very well done, with no glaring mistranslations, and they were very faithful to the original characters and overall tone of the series. And then I watched the Funimation English dub. Jamie Markey wrote the script for the English dub, and I have to say that the dub is very good! Oh my god, the way the characters did the voices and the... Yes?
I'm here to take your otaku card.
Why?
You expressed fondness for an anime dub.
Misogynist. Dubs are, in my humble opinion, potentially better than subs at best representing the original Japanese anime. Yeah, you heard that right. Fight me. And Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid is a prime example of an anime dub done well. As a fellow translator, I second that. It's well written, funny, does not sound like a translation, is well localized rather than anglicized. It doesn't overly change the dialogue, the voice acting is good, and it amped up the meta, self-aware aspects of the show. Like in episode 1, when Kobayashi told Toru,
Another thing, you can't wear the same thing every day like you're in some anime. You're going to have to change clothes too.
The Dragon Maid dub adaptation also added to the original humor of the show with some hilarious original jokes and cute wordplay.
There, here. How to tame your dragon. You'll never know unless you try. Could you, would you, for the new year? I could not, would not. Now let it go.
In short, it captured the flavor of the original Japanese version very well. And I think it's important to remember what Marquis did well in her adaptation of Dragon Maid before we proceed to perform our autopsy on it. And on that note, let's get to the issues brought up by the angry fans.
Kobayashi! You're right, she's just your basic cosplay maid! It's cultural appropriation, but without any culture!
In episode 1, Takia calls Toru's cosplay of a maid cultural appropriation, but without the culture. To better understand where this adaptation might have come from, let's consult the original Japanese script.
Kobayashi domo! 確かにトールタンのメイドレベルはコスプレ! 外人が忍者や侍してるようなものでやんす!
This line was subbed as, I agree, Toru-tan's a cosplay level maid. She's just like those foreigners pretending to be ninja or samurai. And it was dubbed as, Kobayashi, you're right. She's just your basic cosplay maid. It's cultural appropriation, but without any culture. The first half is basically the same in both the sub and dub versions, so let's move on to the next part. Gaijin means foreigner. However, it's actually kind of a rude word for foreigner. It usually means non-Asian foreigner or Westerner, and it's not exactly a racial slur, but it's kind of like when we in the US mock Southerners by calling them rednecks. Ga is a particle that is sort of like is or are. Ninja ya samurai means things like ninja, samurai, etc. Shiteru is a verb that means to do or to be in some cases. And in this case, since it is being applied to ninja ya samurai, it is turning that whole thing into a verb. Things like ninjaing, samuraiing, etc. X, yo na mono, means a thing or a concept that's kind of like X. Deyansu is anime speak for de aru or desu. And this is a prime example of how a lot of anime characters don't actually talk like regular people. So altogether, this sentence literally means it's a concept like foreigners doing cosplay of ninja, samurai, etc. So the sub is rather close to this very literal translation. It's missing some of the mocking and the contempt in the original Japanese version, but we can tell from Takiya's animation and voice acting that he feels very passionate about what he's saying.
And yeah, when non-Japanese people who don't know anything about ninja or samurai pretend to be ninja or samurai, they are being ignorant and deserve to be mocked by the Japanese people for appropriating their culture.
Cultural appropriation is the adoption of an element or elements of one culture or identity by members of another culture or identity. This can be controversial when members of a dominant culture appropriate from disadvantaged minority cultures. According to critics of the practice, cultural appropriation differs from acculturation, assimilation, or equal cultural exchange in that this appropriation is a form of colonialism. When cultural elements are copied from a minority culture by members of a dominant culture, these elements are used outside of their original context, sometimes even against the expressly stated wishes of members of the originating culture.
Cultural appropriation is not just some SJW feminist buzzword. It comes from academia. Indeed, I first encountered the term in grad school before I dropped out to become a bottom-tier YouTuber. The culture which Toru is appropriating in this case is maid culture, or rather maid enthusiast culture. As a common cosplayer, well, dragon technically, but Takiya doesn't know this yet, she is not part of this maid enthusiast culture, but she is adopting an element of that culture. Therefore, this is enough evidence to justify Takiya describing her actions as cultural appropriation. Note also that cultural appropriation isn't always a bad thing. It is simply a member of culture A taking something from culture B, which Toru has done. Yeah, but would Takiya really use the phrase cultural appropriation? Even if that's what Toru was doing, that doesn't change the fact that cultural appropriation is usually a term that lefties use. It's rather insular. But Takiya and Kobayashi are both college educated. Also, consider Takiya's motive in saying what he's saying. In both the Japanese and English versions, he's being sassy and putting down Toru. And he follows up cultural appropriation with without the culture, which is a clever play on words wherein, if you say someone has no culture, you're saying they're uncultured. Or in other words, they have trash taste. Like me. Okay, yeah, so even though Takiya didn't use the phrase cultural appropriation or bunka no toyo in Japanese, that line did work for the scene and for Takiya. I guess the main takeaway here is that the woke crowd does not own the sole rights to the phrase cultural appropriation. Academics and people making wordplay jokes can also use it. I personally wouldn't have translated the line this way, but it's really not that much of a stretch. Okay, on to the next issue in question.
Slut shame. Verb. To stigmatize a woman for engaging in behavior judged to be promiscuous or sexually provocative. Example. She was slut-shamed for wearing a bikini.
知ってる。あなたがたぶらかした体で寝取られインナーメガネ
In this scene, Kanna does call Kobayashi netorare, which does in fact mean cuckold. As for innan megane, innan means slutty or nasty or promiscuous, and then megane means glasses. So innan megane means like slutty glasses or bespectacled promiscuous person. Moving on.
いや、なんか誤解してない？インナンて。
Yeah, nanka gogai shitenai means, aren't you making a mistake? And that was translated pretty similarly in both the sub and the dub. So let's go on to the next part. Innan te. Innan, as we covered earlier, means slutty or promiscuous. And then the te means air quotes. It basically puts the word before it in quotes. So this te is where the phrase gets so complicated and it could be translated literally an infinite number of ways. Really important to note here at this juncture that Japanese sentences are structured differently than English sentences. One of these things is the word order is often different. For example, if I were going to say I'm going to school in Japanese, that would be gakko ni ikimasu. But if you look at the word order here in English, that is school to go rather than go to school. So this sort of thing gets really tricky when a person is saying a line and they're cut off mid-sentence because different parts of the sentence get cut off in Japanese than what would get cut off in English. If I were to say in English, I'm going to school, but I get cut off mid-sentence, I would say I'm going to ... And we don't know where I'm going. I could be going to Walmart, I could be going to school, I could be going to hell, who knows? Whereas in Japanese, I would say gakko ni ... if I got cut off mid-sentence. So the listener knows that something involving school is happening. I might be running to school or swimming to school, or there might be aliens at the school, but they have no idea because we're missing that ikimasu verb. So taking this principle back to Kobayashi's line, which is basically just the word slut or slutty in quotes, and then the rest of the sentence gets cut off. If this were an English sentence, it would actually be more like something something slut rather than in Japanese slut something something. But since the sentence is in Japanese word order, not English word order, and Kanna cuts her off, we actually have no idea where Kobayashi was going to go with the rest of that sentence. It could have gone a number of ways. You think I'm a slut? I'm obviously not getting any, so that's a pretty weak insult. How dare you use such an offensive word as slut? A slut, you say? Thanks, I do get around. Where'd you even learn the word slut? Aren't you like 7? Since Kobayashi didn't get a chance to finish her sentence, and there's only a limited number of mouth flaps or seconds in which to put a subtitle or for a dub voice actor to say a line, the writer has to make a judgment call there and decide what the entire sentence was going to be and then cut that sentence off. Little insider information here, but sometimes the original Japanese scripts will have the rest of the line in parentheses for the sake of the voice actor, the Japanese one, who's doing that line, so they know where that sentence was going to go. But since I was not the translator for this series and I did not have the official Japanese script, I can't really confirm what that original line was supposed to be. So the sub-translator went with "I'm not a slut," cutting off the word slut halfway, and Marky went with "don't slut shame me," with the word "me" being cut off a little bit. And both of these translations are technically wrong, since the original Japanese was really only the word slutty in air quotes. But the vagueness of the original Japanese line does leave it open to interpretation, therefore neither translation is really wrong. So the real question is Miss Kobayashi the type of person who would use slut shame in conversation? As a feminist, I would love to say that Miss Kobayashi would indeed take this moment to teach Kanna a lesson that we should not call a woman slut, but alas, even I don't think Kobayashi would have said "don't slut shame me." If anything, Kobayashi would be surprised to be called a slut. She's demonstrated throughout the series that she's a rather bland sort of person. She always dresses conservatively, and there's no evidence of her ever hooking up with anyone. There's not even any indication that she and Takia are banging behind the scenes. Not that there would be anything wrong with that. So I don't think that she would indignantly feel the need to defend herself and defend women's sexual autonomy. But wait. Did Kobayashi say that line in earnest, or was it just a joke? Let's check that again.
Don't slut shame me.
Yeah, in both the original Japanese and English dubs, Kobayashi has a very sarcastic, dry humor sort of vibe to her. So she really could have meant "don't slut shame me" as a joke, and indeed this scene is very humorous. It is supposed to make us laugh. "Don't slut shame me" does not become a pivotal plot point, and it's not some kind of deep insight into Kobayashi's character. It's a joke, which you may or may not find to be funny. While it's not the translation choice I would have made, I wouldn't call it wrong, especially since the original Japanese was so incredibly vague. I also wouldn't accuse Marky of trying to push a political agenda on anime fans from this example alone, since again, it was a joke, and Kobayashi could have been invoking the phrase "don't slut shame me" to make fun of it, rather than to advocate for sex positivity. So yeah, the "don't slut shame me" line was a bit cringe for my taste, but ultimately I don't think it did any damage to the anime. In fact, if you check out the Funimation comment section, a lot of the fans liked it. I certainly did.
There is nothing revolutionary whatsoever about the control of women's bodies by men. The woman's body is the terrain on which the patriarchy is erected.
Okay, it is finally time to talk about our favorite femdragon with tremendous titties, Luoka. So yes, it's pronounced Lukoa, not Luoka, like my dumb dyslexic brain thought it was. And of course, I wouldn't find this out until after I'd already filmed all these bits. I considered dubbing over all the occurrences of Luoka with Lukoa, but I've already been working on this video for like 3 months, and I'm tired, and it would be obvious anyway, so let's just turn this into a game and count every time I mispronounce Luoka's name. God damn! Since Marky not only wrote the dub script for Dragon Maid, but voiced Luoka as well, this made her an even bigger target for the online mob. Especially when this line
何ですかその格好。
いつも言われるから露出度を抑えたんだ。
was dubbed as
What are you wearing that for? Oh, those pesky patriarchal societal demands were getting on my nerves, so I changed clothes.
See, it's funny because the patriarchy expects us to just... And then when we actually... Oh, never mind. You may have already seen this analysis somewhere online before, but the phrase
いつも言われるから露出度を抑えたんだ。
literally translated means everyone always tells me to cover up, so I lessened my skin exposure. Notice how the everyone and many other words in this sentence are in parentheses, and that is because of the verb iwareru, which is the passive voice version of the verb you, or to say. Japanese speakers in general use passive voice much more often than English speakers, and often as localizers we have to change their dialogue from passive voice to active voice so that it sounds more natural in English. So, since Luoka is using passive voice here, she is not specifying who told her, let alone what that person or persons was telling her. See how vague Japanese can be and how that sometimes forces a translator to do a lot of interpretation on what the character or the show writer was thinking when translating the sentence? I don't know, I think that's sort of a relevant point to bring up at this juncture. This questionable entity that was telling Luoka stuff could have been anybody. If we change that line from passive voice to active voice, the line could be, Kobayashi always tells me to cover up, or you always tell me to cover up, or random people always tell me to cover up, or society at large always tells me to cover up, which is how a translator could have arrived at patriarchy, even though she did not mention kafu chose in her original dialogue. It is not even 100% clear that this person, or persons, was telling Luoka to cover up. They could have been telling her anything. They could have been telling her Coke is better than Pepsi, or that she should become an astronaut. I'm always told leaves out so much key information that would be really important in an English sentence, so as localizers, we have to do our best to fill in the gaps. So the real question is, did Luoka change her clothes under duress by the oppressive patriarchy? Was she lamenting this fact? And would she be aware of and use the word patriarchal? Luoka is an ex-goddess, dragon-ish being. The point is, she is not from planet Earth and she is not used to our ways. Her main role in the series is comic relief, the main running gag, of course, being that she has these gigantic bouncing bazooms, and yet seems to be completely unaware of how her free display of her assets bothers people. Another running gag is that Luoka's obliviousness to how she is perceived makes her behavior around Shota, an elementary school boy, borderline predatory. Her interactions with Shota run along that very fine line of what is appropriate and inappropriate to joke about in entertainment. I have more to say about this aspect of Luoka, but we'll get into that later. Jokes and fan service aside, Luoka is a very chill character. She can come across as airheaded, but that comes from an ignorance of how our world works, not from a lack of intelligence. Also, interestingly, she uses the boku pronoun to describe herself. This is the soft masculine pronoun that mild-mannered boys and men will use in Japan. Japanese women rarely use the boku pronoun IRL, and if they do, it is usually to express that they are not entirely 100% female in their gender identity. So what I'm trying to say here is that Luoka's speech pattern reduces her traditional femininity. Now, even if the use of this sort of speech pattern is an indicator of a non-binary gender identity in real Japanese women, that's not necessarily the case with anime girls. As my colleague mentioned earlier, anime characters don't always speak like actual Japanese people, and the writer might have given Luoka this speech pattern just to make her stand out. But I still don't think that she was given this speech pattern entirely arbitrarily. To me, it seems that she was given this boyish manner of speaking to contrast with her hyper-feminine body and how it is sexualized. So I ask again, knowing everything we know about Luoka's character, would she use the term patriarchal? If we're being generous, yes, Luoka might have used a word like patriarchal. She might have finally decided to find out why everyone drags her away and done a little research on the internet and found out that our patriarchal society controls us and tells us what we can and cannot wear as women. That no one will take us seriously if our skin is exposed, and that if boys and men are tempted by our bodies, then the onus is on us to cover up, rather than on them to respect our bodily autonomy and let us dress as we please. But that wasn't the point of the scene. It was meant to be a continuation of the running gag that everyone keeps dragging Luoka away for dressing the way she does, but that Luoka doesn't understand why this is happening. And the joke here is that she may have covered up her skin, but her skin-tight sweatsuit is still showing off her big boobs in all their glory. Which is why Toru follows up this line with,
"次は体を変えるといいですよ."
Give it a week, they'll be begging you to change back.
In the original Japanese version, Luoka, for not understanding how her body is sexualized, was the butt of the joke. But in the dub version, society, for fetishizing Luoka's body, was the butt of the joke. To be honest though, I don't think this joke works in either version actually. Agreed. The real problem here is Toru's line in both the Japanese and the English versions. Toru is not supposed to be in on the joke here. Usually, Kobayashi and Takiya are our voices of reason who make little quips and jokes when our dragon characters fail to misunderstand aspects of Japanese or human culture. It really should have been Kobayashi with the punchline. I think the joke would have worked much better in both cases then. So yes, the patriarchal joke really did come out of left field, pun intended. And of the 3 complaints raised about the dub, this one was definitely the— Whoa, wait a minute. 3 complaints? Yeah, the 3 anti-SJW complaints that this video is addressing. Oh, but there's more complaints than that, sweetie. Love your hair, by the way. Thanks. What complaints? Ms. Marquis has been accused of many things by the online mob. Of pushing a feminist agenda, of pushing a liberal agenda, of being mean to fans, of not caring about the original Japanese creators, of getting someone fired who didn't deserve it, of being a commie. But while Ms. Marquis awaits the verdict of the online mob for her appropriation of slut-shaming patriarchies, I would like to bring forth an offense of a far more nefarious nature. Ms. Marquis, it pained me to discover this, but you are guilty of one of the most cardinal sins in all of wokedom: queer erasure and joking about racism. She what now? If you really are our feminist SJW comrade, then explain this line.
It's you! I love you, Miss Kobayashi! I'm not into women or dragons.
In the original Japanese, Kobayashi merely said, "Watashi wa onna nanda ga," ... which means, "But I am a woman, so ... And a few online SJWs, myself included, were not too happy about this change. The "but we're both girls" line is such a common trope in Yuri. How could Marquis miss that? In the original Japanese version, Kobayashi never explicitly said that she is not into women, because obviously she is either a lesbian or bi, because, spoilers, she does develop feelings for Toru by the end of the series. To have Kobayashi explicitly state that she is not into women is queer erasure, and I will not— But maybe she was only saying that she's not into women or dragons just to shut down Toru. Kind of like how a girl will say she has a boyfriend if a guy she doesn't like asks her out and she wants to get rid of him. Which is also wrong. Femmes should not have to hide behind fictitious boyfriends just to avoid being stalked or beaten up by the men they reject. Also, maybe Kobayashi just wasn't sure at this point that she was into women. Maybe she was closeted, and who and when to come out to is a very personal decision to be made. Well, what about this one then?
I'm not like a dragon racist or anything. I'm just not in the market right now to hire a maid.
What about it? Don't you see? She's trivializing racism, making light of the struggles of people of color. There was no such insensitivity in the original Japanese. What Kobayashi really said here was, "Doragon daka nanda ka shiran ga, watashi wa hito o yatou tsumori wa nai yo." Doragon daka nanda ka shiran ga, which means, I don't know if you're a dragon or whatever, but she did not mention racism, let alone joke about it. But that was just a joke. I'm not finished yet. Why hasn't anyone acknowledged how borderline criminal Luoka's behavior is around Shota? And Marquis kinda made Luoka's behavior even more flirtatious around him by having her call him Shota baby all the time.
Shota baby. Shota baby. Shota baby. Shota baby. Shota baby! Help. You're my charm, Shota baby.
Just imagine if the genders were reversed here. What if you had some big Chad waving his beefy arms around a little moe girl? Everyone would be outraged. But we think Shota's plight is funny just because he's a boy? Talk about sexist double standards. Wait, so is Dragon Maid too SJW or too anti-SJW? You can't have it both ways. I'm starting to think like this is a lot of outrage for the sake of outrage. Oh, sweetie, have you ever been on the internet? Well, I do think it's important to take an anime's overall tone and messaging into account when you're translating it, since that will inform your word choices. Both the woke and the anti-woke crowd were accusing Jamie Marchi of being unfaithful to the original anime and its message. So I think the real question is Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid overall a feminist anime or an anti-feminist anime? Okay, I'm gonna need something stronger for this.
For a film to pass the Bechdel test, the movie must simply have the following. 1. It must have at least 2 female characters. 2. They must both have names. 3. They must talk to each other about something other than a man. The test is not a measure of how good or feminist a film is, but it does highlight just how male-dominated cinema really is.
Okay, so was Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid originally promoting a feminist agenda? At its heart, Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid is a classic fish-out-of-water story that shows our world through the eyes of all-powerful beings and follows the connections they make with our human characters. It's an exploration of girl-on-girl romances, family, chosen family, and friendships. Now, the girl-on-girl romances could be queer empowerment,
or it could be because lesbians are hot.
Family is considered a more conservative theme, while chosen family is considered a more progressive concept.
Big floppy dragon titty fan service.
But in a way, this trope is almost meta-satire because Kobayashi has to make some quip about why dragons always have such amazing tits.
You've got amazing tits.
This show critiques Japanese society here and there, like when Kanna was shopping for school supplies and she questioned why everyone has to be the same. This tradition-preserving worldview is quite right-wing, so I would
take your top off again.
Okay, you're blocked.
Stupid bitch! Fat and ugly anyway.
Kobayashi works with computers and has a platonic male friend. This is rather progressive, letting the female lead of a show being more than just a pretty face who fawns over guys. Nah, she's just your stand-in for your average cis-het male protag of any seinen harem series. Okay, well then what about the fact that Dragon Maid features Norse mythology and witchcraft? Seems like the Christian right would be up in arms over such heresy. Dude, Japan is not hyper-Christian or anti-witchcraft like the West is. Well, what about Luoka's Boku pronouns then? Like I said before, that's more like a storytelling device to differentiate between your characters in a manga. Luoka isn't there to challenge gender norms and represent NBs. She's there for fan service. Well, it super passes the Bechdel test at least. Like almost every conversation in that show is between 2 female characters and not about men. Ah, Bechdel test, Schmeckdel test. If that pop feminist test were at all valid, a movie consisting of 2 women talking about paint drying would be considered a feminist masterpiece. Look, I'm just trying to help you out. Just look at the mangaka, Cool Shoujin... Kurusho-shinja. All his works, Komori-san Can't Decline, I Can't Understand What My Husband Is Saying, and Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid all fall into the same seinen, meta-satire, slice of life, and huge titties category. So no, Dragon Maid is not feminist. It's not anti-feminist either. It's not deep. It's not political. It's satirical otaku humor. So, given everything we know about the mangaka, the characters, the anime as a whole, at the very least, Luoka's patriarchal line was, in technical terms, bad. I'm sorry. So, where do we go from here?
Dear Gen Fukunaga and the team at Funimation, I am writing to you today to express my sincerest disappointment for the English dub of Miss Kobayashi. I believe it is Jamie Margaret for personalizing the English dub has been allowed cultural appropriation, slut-shaming, and patriarchy. It is with regret that until I believe it is highly references are removed for a person in her position to insert DVD Blu-ray release cultural mis...
I'm going to clarify here that Ethnic Weeb showed no hostility towards Jamie Marchi or even towards Funimation. He indeed encouraged those who agreed with him to be polite in voicing their disappointment towards Funimation. He also wasn't calling on Marchi to be fired. So the last thing I want is for everyone who sides with Marchi or Funimation to flood Ethnic Weeb's comment section with hate. And this video isn't just a response to Ethnic Weeb's video either. I don't mean to single him out here. His video just so concisely compiled all the complaints that it was a good reference. Besides him, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of anime fans who believe left-wing opinions are infecting the anime industry like a cancer. And there's a very vocal minority of this right-wing faction of weebs who has taken their outrage to more toxic levels.
When Gamergators attacked me over a line in prison school that I neither wrote nor directed, my career as I knew it was over. Everything I wrote was gone over with a fine-tooth comb, looking for changes that could be twisted to an agenda that I never had. I received relentless hate for a handful of lines I wrote years ago. Overall, that's less than 1% of the lines that I've ever written while adapting scripts for anime. And while there's been some support, I've generally been left to deal with the harassment alone. It's also been made clear to me that if I did stand up for myself and refuse to take the harassment like a good girl, I would no longer have a job. Meanwhile, the harassment grew, and I was on a show that used the term SJW. The harassers assumed I must have been behind it. I did not write or direct that show. Like Prison School, the writers and director were men, but yet again, that did not matter. I was the one that received the death threats, and I was the one targeted in a continued public campaign of harassment.
Neither Marquis nor her peers in the translation or localization industry are hyper-partisan SJW monsters whose sole purpose in life is to ruin anime for right-wing anime fans. We're anime fans ourselves, and it hurts us very much when anime fans, people who love what we love, demonize us, assume we're all bad faith actors, and go over our work with a fine-tooth comb, hoping to find some word or phrase that can be construed as left-wing so that they can cancel us over it. I mean, aren't conservatives the ones who are supposed to hate cancel culture? Just a few weeks ago, I was translating the line of a protag from a popular anime franchise. He was advocating for open borders and an aggressive redistribution of wealth to save a country that was on the brink. And there I was, grateful for once that I'm under NDA and not credited for my translations, because I knew, as I translated that very left-wing line into English, that the anti-SJW weeb mob might just assume that that was me inserting my politics into the translation, and that they would come after me for it. Which brings me to a very key point. Most non-Japanese anime fans don't speak Japanese, which means all they have to go off of is a sub versus a dub, or a pro sub versus a fan sub, to determine how accurate or how authentic a translation is. This belongs to anime fans of all political ideologies, and I don't mean to single out just the conservatives. As I illustrated earlier, sometimes the woke mob can also show up to cancel a translator over a problematic word or what they perceive as erasure of a character's sexuality. We get our fair share of apolitical complaints too, like when fans get angry over subtitles leaving out suffixes like san or senpai, or when Higurashi fans got mad at Funimation, once again, for the translator translating ni as Big Brother, when they were used to it just being left as ni in the OG translation. And because anime fans don't understand Japanese, and they rely on us, the translators, to understand the anime they love so much, it is crucial that they trust us to respect anime and to make the translations as faithful to the original as possible. And when they perceive the work of one of us as unfaithful to the anime, that has a domino effect on the rest of us. But since it's already taken me like a half hour just to explain 3 questionable lines in an anime, and it would take 5 years at least of intensive study for every single anime fan to really understand what makes a faithful translation in the first place, the best we can do is just ask that anime fans trust us.
I have something to say. Too bad somebody blocked me earlier.
Okay, unlock. What did you want to say?
I don't trust you. You're all corrupt. We should just have machines translate our anime. That would be the purest, least biased translation possible.
Are you sure you want that?
Certainly. Torotan's Maid level is spray.
Did you misunderstand what you dislike? Nasty.
Break up! Return it!
Well, then at least make the translations as literal as possible.
Again, are you sure you want that?
Always being told, therefore suppressed exposure.
Next, change body is good.
Well, At least don't insert your politics into your translation.
Oh, please. If my fellow translators and I really had a mission to insert our politics into every anime we translated, the Dragon Maid dub would be a pretty pathetic attempt at leftist propaganda, if you ask me. If Marky really wanted to insert feminist propaganda into the Dragon Maid dub, there would have been more than 3 questionable lines for starters, and it would have sounded a little more something like this.
Kobayashi! The real crime is that your salary is 70% of mine! We should go on strike!
Agreed! While we're at it, let's demand that my boss pays for my birth control!
Or this.
You're a slut! Don't be a swerve, Kanna. Sex work is real work.
Thanks! I've seen
you're
the
welcome.
light!
Or how about some actual leftism?
What are you wearing that for?
I was at the general strike, marching for a $25 an hour minimum wage and a Green New Deal.
Go get him, comrade!
Thanks!
However, I can certainly let you know one thing, Miss Kobayashi. Your boss is exploiting your labor. If you unionized and democratized the workplace, then you would be free from this modern-day slavery.
We must abolish capitalism.
So what? I'm supposed to praise you for just not outright trolling fans with politics? That's a pretty low bar.
No, you're supposed to praise us for translating anime in the first place so you have a chance to see it at all. Remember what Marky said about all the hate going towards less than 1% of all of the lines that she wrote? A lot of fans who came to her defense made the same point, and it's a good one, so let's unpack it. The average episode of anime has about 325 lines in it, give or take. At 13 episodes long, Dragon Maid has approximately 4,225 lines of dialogue in the entire dub. Only 3 of those lines were SJW-ish in nature, and I think after my analysis at least, it's pretty fair to say that only really 1 of those 3 lines was truly cringe. This means that only about 1 out of 4,225 lines, or that's about 0.02% of the entire dub translation was bad. Or put another way, this means that 99.98% of the lines in the Dragon Maid dub were good.
Yeah, but 1 bad line is 1 bad line too many. It's a slap in the face to all the Japanese writers that worked so hard on the series.
Yeah, I've seen this talking point come up a lot. Curious how it's never backed up by an actual quote from a Japanese animator or writer. Now, snark aside, it is possible that the odd Japanese animator or writer would be irked by the direction a translator took with their series. After all, manga authors are sometimes irked by the directions that anime studios take with their works when they're adapted for an anime in the first place. But once a work of art is adapted into another work of art by another creator, that new creator does have artistic license to change some things, especially with anime dubs. A dub is more than just a translation, it's a whole other adaptation. Having said that, however, speaking from personal experience, any deviation to a script has to go through many channels for it to be approved. On any given localization team for a game or an anime or a manga, you'll usually have 1 or more translators, 1 or more editors, and the original client, which is usually the Japanese studio. The Japanese studio reviews these sorts of changes, such as the tsundere to fragile male ego line in the House of Fata Morgana, before they are approved. We generally work off of glossaries of terms approved by the original Japanese creators, and we are generally in close communication with them throughout the process. And sometimes, believe it or not, the original Japanese creators of anime and games actually ask us to change their work. The bulk of what I have translated the last 8 years is otome games, or dating sim games for girls and women. And the Japanese game developers themselves explicitly asked me to omit profanity in my translations and to soften up any dialogue that may sound too sexist for a Western audience. Let me repeat that. The Japanese game developers asked me to omit profanity and soften up any dialogue that might be too sexist for a Western audience. And why would they do this? Well, because the purpose of otome games is to make girls blush and get hot over the romantic stories with the guys. They realize that what turns on Japanese women might turn off non-Japanese women, and they don't mind a little tweaks to their dialogue here and there to achieve their purpose. And as for the profanity censorship, They just want to make their product more marketable. My point is, the Japanese developers are not oblivious victims whose art is being desecrated without their consent or control. They are very much a part of the process, and they would not give a studio the rights to produce an English language version of their content if they did not like what that studio was doing. So claiming that the Japanese creators are being victimized is frankly disrespectful to them. As a lifelong Star Wars fan, I know how it feels to have a story you've loved your entire life be ruined by a studio or a writer. I understand that we all just want our anime to be the best it can be, and we feel betrayed when it falls short of our personal expectations. I think it's okay to be offended by the artistic choice made by a dub scriptwriter or a voice actor or a manga letterer, but what's not okay is to harass the creators of something you love because of minor creative differences. Frankly, there are much more substantial injustices in the anime industry that are worthy of your outrage. The gripes I covered in this video essay all fall under the culture war, and in the year of our Lord 2020, it's still going strong. And while I do care about the issues in the culture war, I ultimately think that people obsess over these things far too much, especially on social media.
It's all a distraction. The upper 1% is getting richer while the rest of us are getting poorer. This is divide and conquer.
And even within the context of anime translations, the divide seems to come down to the culture war. But let me present to you some injustices that are far more worthy of your outrage. A changed line here or there does very little to a story, especially if those lines were jokes.
It's not like having Lukoa say the word patriarchal once during a bad joke significantly changed her character, her relationship to the other characters, or the overall story. It was one bad joke, not the final season of Game of Thrones.
And Kobayashi saying, "I'm not into women or dragons," didn't really change her character either, since the point of that line was that she was rejecting Toru, not stating some ultimate truth about herself. And I'm gonna jump out on a limb here and say that Kaoru's "worthy of my grace" and "I like you" lines were not queer erasure either, since most of his queerness was expressed by his actions rather than his words. And it's not like his line was translated as, "I like you as a friend," or "I like you in a completely straight way." Queer erasure in anime dubs really is a problem, though, when it actually happens.
How'd you guys meet then?
We're cousins. We've been inseparable since we were born. We can almost read each other's minds.
Like best friends?
So you see, I'm not lonely without a boyfriend. I don't think about it at all.
I remember it vividly. It was with Brad, the cutest guy in the school.
I'm trying to tell you that your dear cousin Sailor Neptune is the holder of a pure heart crystal.
The fact that sailors Uranus and Neptune are in love is actually kinda really significant to the plot of Sailor Moon S. So making them cousins and erasing their romance and their queerness really did damage the story, and it is a slap in the face to queer girls who were inspired and empowered by Uranus and Neptune's relationship. But true extreme censorship like this rarely happens anymore in anime. You'll probably only find it in dubs for kids shows nowadays, and even then, it's not because the writer was trying to push some kind of agenda. It's because of the broadcast rules and standards that were put in place so that corporations can rock the boat as little as possible and make as much money as possible. Capitalism. The Kanipa Effect already did an excellent video about this problem in the anime industry, so I encourage you all to check it out. But yes, sadly, a lot of people in the anime industry are overworked, underpaid, and do not receive benefits. I have been a part of this statistic myself. I already made a video touching upon my own experiences in this, and yeah, I and many other professionals in the anime industry am currently uncredited in everything I translate. And while my anonymity protects me from the online outrage mob, it also makes my resume look pretty weak. And I don't get to tell you guys about any of the cool projects I'm working on. A sad note to end on, but I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the tragedy that struck KyoAni, the very studio who produced Dragon Maid, in the summer of 2019. Over 30 employees were killed when a domestic terrorist set himself and the studio on fire. I know that most of the online mob, no matter how angry they are, would never even dream of doing such a thing to Funimation or anyone who works there. But it is a very real worry that materializes in the back of our minds whenever we receive death threats for our translation choices. Sometimes shit gets real. Well, I don't know about you, but I sure feel better getting all that off my chest. I hope you all had as delightful a time as I had, and I hope that we all learned something today. Seriously though, if you got into anime within the last 10 years, I hope you realize how incredibly lucky you are. You get to watch countless shows for free, on demand, right after they come out in Japan. Back in my day, we had to wait 10 months for some fan-subbing group in Salem, Oregon to finally subtitle the 10th volume of Fushigi Yugi and then ship it to us through snail mail on a VHS. Many pro translators are very online today, and we're actually very happy to talk about our translating choices to fans if given the opportunity. You're still not going to like every translating choice we make, and that's totally okay. I mean, hell, even I am dissatisfied with some of the choices I or my peers make sometimes. Also, ask any translator or creative artist about how many times they have changed their mind about something or second-guessed themselves, and they'll make an hour-long video essay about it. But if there's one thing I want you to take away from this, it's that people in the anime industry are fucking weebs. And we're human beings with feelings, just like you. We're not perfect. We do sometimes make mistakes. And since art and the art of translation are subjective, it is impossible for us to please everyone. But we really do love anime. We love anime so much. We love it so much that we devoted our lives to it, our livelihoods to it. Seriously, whether or not I get to eat next month depends on how well I translated your waifu's dialogue in episode 13. And even though I personally did not like the patriarchal line and the slut shame line, I could take it or leave it, I want to reiterate just how much I loved Jamie Marchi's writing in the dub script for Dragon Maid and how good I think it is overall. She and the other voice actors and staff really brought that story and those characters to life in a way that was very faithful to the original Japanese. And it's a damn shame that she doesn't get more credit for what she did very well in 99.98% of that dub adaptation. So if you did see the Dragon Maid dub and you enjoyed it, or if you just want to send some support to a fellow otaku, go ahead and tweet her some love. But if you have made it through this video and you still somehow aren't convinced that Marchi and other professionals in the anime translation and localization industry really do care about making anime faithful to the original Japanese version, then learn Japanese, I guess. But if you do choose to go down this path, then be careful. I heard there once was a young, conservative, anime otaku who loved anime, but she hated how all the profanity was censored out and how all the chans and sans and samas were left out of professional translations. She wanted to be able to enjoy anime in its purest, most natural form. So she learned Japanese, lived in Japan for a while, and spent years practicing, studying, and consuming thousands of hours of manga, light novels, anime, and music, translating for hours every single day for years and years, until she turned pro and had 3 life-changing epiphanies about translation. Number 1, there's no such thing as a perfect translation. Number 2, pro-anime translations are still by fans for fans, just on a larger scale. And number 3, we must abolish capitalism. See you in my next anime translation, comrades. Oh, it's stale.
What are you wearing that for?
Everyone kept telling me to change my clothes, so I did. What do you think?
Better change your boobs, too.
You slut in glasses.
Okay, pretty sure you're making a mistake. I'm not a slut.
Break up with her!
Kobayashi! You're right! It's like all those weebs dressing as samurai and ninja in public!
You never saw healthcare and a living wage, and the wealth tax to pay for it all. Student loan debt forgiveness, no matter your age, and an infrastructure overhaul. Dependence and sex work and end all the wars. It's a climate change seriously. But if we hope to make any of this progress, we'll need public design of the elections, bring choice women to make a selection, find things that are
We must abolish capitalism.